across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is a Tuesday edition of Point of View. We're so grateful that you can join us. And as I announced yesterday, we're going to have Dr. Paul Barreca in studio with us, and he is with us indeed. I thought we would focus some of our time and attention on Iran, but also prophecy, because as you may know, he's the 8th Executive Director of Fellowship International Mission, an individual that graduated from Word of Life Bible Institute, teaches at Word of Life Bible Institutes around the world, of course has his doctorate now as well. And for those of you that are actually on his mailing list, maybe you've seen this. I received this in my mail for those of you watching online, and this is the summary of their 75th annual magazine, which came out in the fall from 1950 to 2025, which is pretty amazing. And I'll hasten to add, he was not there at the beginning, by the way. So, but that's 75 years of a mission organization. And of course, the author of such books as Follow the Master and a variety of others that we've talked about on this program. Of course, we have gone and he's helped us take people to Israel and to Greece and to Rome. And Dr. Paul Barreca, it's just great to see you face to face.
Good to be with you, Kerby.
I might just mention, too, that not only have you, of course, been teaching at all the Word of Life Bible Institute and other places, the reason you're here this week is because of Dallas Theological Seminary. And so you were having a chance to meet with a variety of people, some of whom we've either had on the program in the past, like Lee Strobel, or people that we're going to have on. Paul Weaver's book's coming out very shortly on the issue of archaeology, which is one of 3 books. Even today, Jeremiah Johnston's book, The Jesus Discoveries, is out today. We have one with Titus Kennedy, which will be, I think, the first or second day in April. And, of course, we're going to get Paul Weaver on. His book's coming out later this month. Yeah. So if nothing else, before we get into that any further, this is just sort of a golden age of apologetics and archaeology and science. Yeah. And for those of you like yourself that are Bible teachers, it's just amazing how much we have found.
And it's so important because, as we talk about so many times, we live in a post-Christian culture, and apologetics is so important to give to the church folks. I was just talking to one of the students at Dallas Seminary today who's studying to be a pastor. And when you give your people apologetic arguments, those are the words, and you're training them how they can answer their friends and relatives, coworkers. So important for pastors to be up to date and to be using that. And wow, with these 3 books, we have a lot of firepower on some of these great discoveries.
I'm just excited about each one of the interviews we're going to be doing. Looking forward to Paul Weaver, Dr. Paul Weaver. I met him before he even went to Word of Life, so I got to get that doctor in there every once in a while. But yesterday, my commentary that many people hear not only on this program but around the world, and all sorts of different radio programs, and then they get posted on websites, and so people all over the place have seen that, is we talked about the threat from Iran. And I think as a background, that's helpful, Paul, because we are a little bit older, but I recognize if I'm talking to individuals that maybe weren't alive in the 1970s and 80s, this is like ancient history. And even when we talk about some of the things that have happened more recently, maybe they are just learning about that. But going back to 1979 is, of course, when the Shah of Iran was deposed. And as a result, the Ayatollah Khomeini took over. And so you certainly, for those of us that remember when Ronald Reagan was elected, we had still 52 American diplomats and staff that were held hostage and released the day in which he was actually inaugurated. And you might say, well, then what happened after that? Well, in 1983, you had the Iranians blowing up the U.S. Embassy and killing 63 people. Hezbollah, through, again, the funding of Iran, blew up the U.S. Marine barracks, 241 service members killed then. And, of course, even as we fought the war on terror, it does seem to me that Iran is the greatest sponsor of terrorism, both Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. So in some respects, if we talk about going back to Israel, and you and I are talking about that, by this time next year, probably be pretty safe because some of those threats just might not exist anymore.
Yeah, the world is such a different place than it was. We were in Israel in October, well, the end of September, 2 years ago. I'm sorry, 2027. Did I get that right? Yeah. And visiting there, and just 2 weeks after we return, that all goes the way it did. So there's so much that has happened there, and yes, it is indeed much safer because so many of the enemies of Israel have been weakened. I wouldn't say eliminated, but certainly weakened.
Yes, and again, you think about that October 2023, you have a situation where, just think about the day before Hamas attacks Israel, and what you have in that particular situation is Hamas is very powerful. Hezbollah has been a threat to Israel for some time. The Houthis are launching all sorts of missiles and disrupting all sorts of trade and commerce in the Middle East. You have Iran trying to build nuclear weapons, and then you have all sorts of things that began to change that, not the least of which, of course, eliminated many of those individuals that were in Hamas and Hezbollah. Most of the individuals, Hezbollah probably don't want to use pagers or anything right now. And then you have in June of 2025, Operation Rising Lion, where Israel takes out a lot of the critical nuclear and military targets. And then later on, you have, of course, the United States striking in Operation Midnight Hammer. So if nothing else, this is a different Middle East. And I might just mention, as we get into this, that we have posted a piece by Peggy Noonan who gives you good news, bad news. Good news is thoughts on Iran. Certainly we have to feel the sense of awe for the U.S. military. Its professionalism, cool, and courage are impressive and inspiring. And she says we would certainly hope that it would succeed, but then goes on and talks about all the things that can go wrong, which is very true. And so we wanted to give you one that's kind of trying to look at it a little differently. Got a piece by Gerald Baker on kind of the war of words and some others. But I thought for just a minute, one of the things that was so intriguing, and I didn't post this, although I maybe will post it later in the week, is Pete Hegseth. You know, we had him a while back as one of our speakers at a luncheon, and when we had him, nobody knew who he was. They all know who he is now. But he was on CBS's 60 Minutes the other day, and they were talking about the religious component, and I wanted to spend some time when we come back from the break with you talking about that, because he reminded us, first of all, of course, that there are individuals in the military that are certainly using their Christian faith to give them boldness. But then I'll just give you the quote here about the eschatology of the Twelver, that's in Shia Islam, that has really prevailed among the Iranian leadership that anticipates Muhammad al-Mahdi, or the Mahdi, who is considered to be kind of the final imam who will return as a result to restore justice at the end of the world. And in some respects, when we come back from the break, I want you to maybe try to explain that, because we have an eschatology, Christians do, but if you take that eschatology and kind of reverse it, then that's the Muslim eschatology. And so whereas Jesus comes to end the war and bring peace, the Mahdi comes to, in a sense, fight the war and really bring everyone under this global caliphate under Sharia Islam. So when we take a break, I wanted to talk about that. And also I found out something else. Pete Hegseth has talked about the Temple Mount. And so I think a couple topics that you and I can get into are the ones we will focus on. And as a little bit later you'd like to join the conversation, we certainly welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Affordability may be a key issue in the midterm elections. President Trump's State of the Union address and the Democratic rebuttal from Governor Abigail Spanberg illustrates the possible campaign themes. The president reminded Americans that core inflation has been at its lowest level in more than 5 years. While it is true, the metric excludes food and energy because the prices of those goods tend to be volatile. The governor proclaimed small business have suffered, everyday Americans are paying the price. Many prices are down, others are up. Gasoline prices have come down significantly. The average price of a new car hit a record high just a few months ago. The president stated that the cost of chicken, butter, and fruit is lower today than when I took office. On the other hand, the governor argued that the cost of groceries has risen. Two actions by the president will affect affordability: gas production and tax breaks. American oil production is up substantially. Lowering the cost of oil and natural gas will lower the overall cost of many items. Trump's big, beautiful bill kept taxes lower for Americans and included no taxes on tips, overtime, and Social Security. Many Americans should be pleasantly surprised by the size of their income tax refunds. There should also be a long-term benefit from the estimated $18 billion in new investments the president has secured. Affordability may not turn out to be much of a blessing for Democratic candidates or much of a liability for Republican candidates. Some economists are predicting deflation later this year because of the AI boom. In that case, job loss may be a bigger issue for voters than affordability. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Paul Barreca in studio with us, and if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll open up the phones in just a minute to give you a chance to join that conversation. And we're really going to focus on some of the religious aspects of this war against Iran right now, and one that I didn't mention but is worth mentioning, and that is the fact that at Fellowship International Mission, you support missionaries, many of whom are persecuted. Now, I don't know if you have a missionary in Iran. You wouldn't tell me if you did anyway. But if you look at this right now in the upcoming Outlook magazine article that I wrote, we point out the fact that many Iranians are becoming Christians, and it's been reported that the Iranian church is maybe the fastest growing church in the world, at least in terms of percentage. So we certainly should be praying for those Christians in Iran who oftentimes are persecuted for their faith. So even though we're going to be talking about some of the prophetic significance, and I might just mention we have an article coming out in the Outlook magazine about that as well, the very significant growth of the church in Iran is amazing.
And not only are they growing, but they're worshiping, even more public about their faith and their worship. They're witnessing, they're evangelizing other Iranians, and they're hungry for freedom, because freedom resides in the heart of those of us that's part of the creation order. And the Iranian believers, I believe many of them are a part of this movement for freedom. And, it's really heartbreaking to think that most likely some of our brothers and sisters in Iran were killed and murdered by this current regime,
yes,
as some of these protests were going on just a couple of months ago.
Yes, about 30,000 or maybe 50,000, depending on which number you look at, and a good number of those probably were Christians. Mm-hmm. Well, let me, if I can, get into some of the kind of religious and prophetic ideas, and I did not know this until we found this article, which maybe we can post, and that is in a speech that Pete Hegseth gave a while back. He talked about the fact that he was optimistic that a third temple might be rebuilt on the Temple Mount, which is, of course, right now where the Dome of the Rock is. And later on in the article, I point out that he's a member, and I didn't know this, of the Reformed Evangelical Churches, which tend to be post-millennial. But whether that or not, there are a lot of people, and you've seen this every time we've gone to Israel, that are convinced that there is going to be a rebuilding of the temple, and the connection to that and some of the persecution of Jewish people, Christian people, and just the whole tensions in the Middle East are something that everybody's been talking about, whether it's certainly the current ambassador to Israel or Tucker Carlson. They all seem to be talking about it right now.
Well, and the interesting thing is that the people in Israel that are moving to rebuild the temple, they're not doing it because they're evangelical Christians.
No, just the opposite.
So you've got the evangelical Christians that see these things prophetically, and then you have Jewish, religious Jews that are pushing for this. And of course, they don't accept the evangelical position at all. But we see such movement from the priesthood. The priests have been identified, and the linens have been manufactured, and the elements of the temple. We were in the Temple Institute, which is kind of a tourist way of introducing visitors to Israel on the things that the Temple Institute are doing. And those folks are
they're serious.
They're serious. They're Jewish folks, and they're not doing it to fulfill biblical prophecy. But we as evangelicals, of course, believing in Scripture, see these things so clearly lined out in the Word of God.
Point us to a couple of verses, because I would encourage people that even if they don't have a Bible with them right now, might look them up later, because they might say, well, you keep saying that, and I hear people sometimes on television talking about that, but where do you find that in the Bible?
Well, so much of the Old Testament prophets, the major, particularly in Isaiah, where Isaiah is writing to the people of Judah, he's prophesying what's going to come, and he's reminding them that even though trouble is coming, God will bring them back to the land. God will restore their land and their fortune, and they will be blessed again. And you have all of those prophecies in Isaiah. But one of the most significant about the temple is found in Daniel. And interesting, of course, Daniel is in Babylon as a captive, and he's given a prophecy in Daniel chapter 9 about 70 sevens, or sometimes if you've read it in the King James, 70 weeks. And it's giving a chronology of what's going to happen for the people of Israel, culminating at the end of a particular period of time, which is a period of 69 sevens. And it says Messiah will be cut off. But here's a verse in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. He, meaning this evil prince that will come, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation. Well, the wing of the temple. There is no temple in Israel today. So for Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 to be fulfilled, it either had to be fulfilled already or it's coming in fulfillment. And we know that it's not been fulfilled already because Jesus refers to Daniel's prophecy.
There you go, because you go to Matthew 24, right? Explain that.
Yeah, so a place that we've stood in Jerusalem. And listen, if you don't go to Israel for any other reason, go to stand on the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem, because you'll hear this prophecy and just kind of see it visually. So the disciples in the last week of Christ's life are on the Mount of Olives talking about when these prophecies are going to take place. And Jesus says in chapter 24, verse 15, "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel," and he gives instructions, let the reader understand it's going to be a very difficult time for Israel. So now Daniel's prophecy is brought to the time of Jesus. And the only way that we can have this fulfilled, it either had to be fulfilled sometime between the ministry of Jesus and the destruction of the temple, or it's still to be fulfilled. And I believe very clearly that this is a prophecy, meaning that for the end times to come, there must be a temple in Jerusalem.
Well, now let's talk about some of the difficulties, the hindrances that might exist. I already mentioned one. You've got on the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, and then right next to it you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the Muslims control that area, but you have a couple other problems as well, don't you?
Yeah, so if you go back to 1967, the 67 War, Israel for the first time had access and control of that area of Jerusalem. And for a few days, they had control of the Temple Mount. And then the U.S. administration and Russia was involved, and the U.S. was involved, and said, you guys got to back off. So they gave control of the Temple Mount back to a Muslim group of individuals. And it's very tightly controlled. In fact, when we've gone, we've not been able to go to the Temple Mount because there's been too much conflict. But you think about it, you've got the Muslims that would just go ballistic, to use a word we've heard recently, if Israel were to go and have a temple. Even when Israelis go up there, and if they are caught praying, riots break out, and and the IDF has to come and settle all of that. So you have the Arab nations that are opposed to a temple. You have the Palestinians that are opposed to a temple. You have Hamas and Hezbollah. Well, think about what's happened since October 7th, 2023. Hezbollah's military power has been unraveled. Hamas' military power has been unraveled. But even now, the threat from Iran is much more diminished. And, Kerby, one of the things I thought about with this war going on is we are so much closer to the possibility of the Arab nations giving Israel permission to build on the Temple Mount. We're closer now than we were just 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
If you think about it, when Iran attacked the UAE and Bahrain and Qatar and all these other countries, they did it because they assumed that they would then be angry with America. Well, they're angry with Iran.
Yes.
And now you have these nations that are aligning with a U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. And just one other thing that, if you remember back last year when those missiles were being launched during the 12-day war, Jordanian and Saudi airspace was intercepting those missiles. All of that happened because of the Abraham Accords. There were arrangements in there where they would begin to, the U.S. and the Arab nations and Israel would share military intelligence. And just it blew my mind that you had Arab nations fighting to protect Israel. And could this lead, what if the Abraham Accords becomes the Abraham Alliance?
Yes. And
could that lead to a situation where there could potentially be allowance for a temple to be rebuilt?
Again, Abraham Accords, of course, that was the first administration under Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo, who we've had on the program and really like. But I think the current Secretary of State, I like him as well, Marco Rubio, who we've also had on the program. And could the Abraham Accords become the Abraham Alliance? Going to take a break, and perhaps you have some comments. We have a lot more to talk about, but if you have some thoughts or agreement, disagreement, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Paul Barreca, and we'll also talk about maybe sometime we'll head back to Israel ourselves from Point of View. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after this.
You know as well as I do that elections matter, but political change can also be fleeting. After all, no politician is America's savior. To truly make a difference, the kind that lasts, we need to repair the soul of our nation. We need to reclaim America's godly heritage. We need to restore a biblical worldview to the culture. And here's the question that I want you to ask yourself. What can I do to help restore a biblical worldview to American culture? At Point of View, that is our mission, restoring a biblical worldview and reclaiming America's godly heritage. And we invite you to partake in that mission by joining the Truth Team. Learn more about the impact you can have as a Truth Team member by visiting pointofview.net. or by calling 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Paul Barreca in studio with us, and we were, Paul, just talking about the Abraham Accords, and that came during the first time when Donald Trump was the president, and I mentioned Mike Pompeo, who not only made some of that happen, but at the same time also said that the Golan Heights are part of Israel and recognized the value of moving the embassy, and we've been to the embassy now in Jerusalem, which before was in Tel Aviv. But what would happen if indeed, and there's some people starting to talk about whether Saudi Arabia and others might join the Abraham Accords that would eventually become the Abraham Alliance?
So even just a few years ago, picturing Israel cooperating with Arab nations was just so unthinkable. One of the things that President Trump has done is that he's kind of just turned things upside down. Sometimes they call him the chaotic president, but new thinking and dealing with things that had been either pushed aside or neglected or said were impossible. For example, previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, said, no, you can't move the embassy out of Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It'll create World War III. And he just goes ahead and does it. And some of those things didn't happen. But I was just stopping to think, Kerby, of the cooperation between Israel and these Arab nations, even militarily. One thing we didn't mention in the last segment there was that in the June War, the 12-day war in June 2025, Iran had launched 500 ballistic missiles toward Israel. And were it not for the cooperation of those Arab nations, the devastation in Israel would have been there was some damage, wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been, but it could have potentially been devastating. So now you've got these Arab nations, at least in some ways, communicating with Israel. Mm-hmm. And there is the possibility, at least you could begin to see it, in some kind of compromise gesture. Could someone like President Trump or Marco Rubio or perhaps another administration, but could someone come along and say, look, this has been a thorny issue for a long time. Let's get this resolved. And, as we're in Israel, on that Temple Mount, you've got the iconic view of the Dome of the Rock. It just, stands out through all of Jerusalem. But there is the proper location for the Jewish temple, which would have been aligned with the Eastern Gate. And there is nothing physically on the Temple Mount in that space.
And some people said maybe they could all be up there, which is amazing to me. I never thought about that until someone said that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and now, I look at Trump and kind of the idea that could he potentially be kind of in the image of Cyrus,
Hey, talk about that for a minute, yeah.
Well,
because people are starting to use that phraseology. I've seen people from Iran saying that he's like Cyrus, and I thought, I need to go learn a little bit more about Cyrus then.
Right. So in the Old Testament, in Isaiah, there is a prophecy before Cyrus was even born, a prophecy that someone would come. It's Isaiah 44. But in verse 28, it says, Cyrus prophesy, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, of the temple, let its foundations be laid. So a prophecy about Cyrus before he's born. Of course, that's a proof of scriptural inspiration. But then in Ezra, when Ezra comes back with the people, of course, Nehemiah comes back and rebuilds the wall. Ezra comes back and reestablishes temple worship. And Ezra says in Ezra chapter 6, verse 3, that it was King Cyrus that gave the Jews permission to leave Babylon, to leave Persia, and to come back and rebuild. And so Isaiah 6, in the first year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem, let the temple be rebuilt. And so Cyrus becomes this Persian king, a Gentile king, involved in God's plan. And the comparison is, Trump is this Gentile king, and you might even say, well, he's maybe not our model for evangelicals as maybe to be your pastor. His language and temperament many times is something that we would say is not a consistent Christian character, but he has certainly been a positive influence in the realm of the relationship with Israel.
Yes.
Moving the temple moving the embassy and protecting Israel. And, it's not just evangelicals that have compared Trump to a Cyrus model. Now, by the way, for our listeners, we're not saying that Trump is the Antichrist or anything else like that. We're not making any predictions about anything that's going to happen. But there's this model of Cyrus, a Persian king, Gentile, and who does things very, very favorable for the land of Israel. And now Trump, a Gentile leader, doing things very, very favorable for the people of Israel. In fact, Bibi Netanyahu in 2018 looked back. This is when the embassy was being moved to Jerusalem, and he referred back to Cyrus and made that analogy between Trump and Cyrus. That's on March 5, 2018, for those who might want to look up some of the references. So there's certainly a picture there, and could God be using this? The significance of this is that could God be using this to put that temple there so that the events that are talked about in the 70th week of Daniel, both in Daniel chapter 9, Matthew 24, 1 Thessalonians 4, the book of Revelation, that those things are set to take place. And we see that possibility and that alignment today even more clearly than we did just 2 weeks ago.
Well, again, I might just mention, some of you might say, this has gone pretty fast. Of course, we do have an Outlook magazine coming up talking about the threat of certainly Iran and why, indeed, we are involved militarily. We do have a particular article on prophecy that Gary Frazier has written, but if you are maybe trying to write these down, we did mention Daniel 9:27 and compare that to Matthew 24, verses 15 and 16. And then you just gave us a couple more verses in the Old Testament, Isaiah 44, verse 28, and Ezra 6:3. And, of course, you also quoted, and I saw this quote by Benjamin Netanyahu from March 5th, 2018, about, I can tell you that the Jewish people have a long memory, so we remember the proclamation of Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, 2,500 years ago. And here he's using that illustration as we're talking about moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So you can check some of that out. I know that some of you probably want to do some fact check, and that's exactly what we encourage you to do. We've also posted some very good articles here today. I won't get to some of them, but if some of you have been concerned about some of the things that Tucker Carlson has said, well, Andrew McCarthy takes that on, so that's one of the articles we've posted. We have a little bit more about this new Ayatollah, The War of Words by Gerald Baker, and of course I mentioned one by Peggy Noonan, and we'll post maybe some of these others in the future. But just before we take a break, we have mentioned in passing that you're not going to Israel this year, but we may be going to Israel next year. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we had a trip scheduled for June, and that can't take place now. But we have rescheduled a Point of View tour to Israel May 15 through 25, 2027. And Kerby, I think this time we're going to pull it off. Things seem to be, calming down. And, the fact of it is Israel has run out of enemies because just one by one, things have been, just lined up. So we have our wonderful tour guide that we have had in years past who's going to be a part of that. We'll be going in through Galilee and then Jerusalem and then the Dead Sea, and a possible, for those who want to stay a little bit longer, to go over to Jordan and to visit Petra, which is a place of biblical mention and biblical significance, a tremendous archaeological site, and also brings back memories of Indiana Jones because the pictures there were filmed in Petra. So it should be a great time, and that tour will be announced and released probably July of this year. So we'll tell you more about it when we get closer.
Yeah, I haven't said a thing about it because every day you wonder what is going to happen in the Middle East yet. And so hold that on very tentatively. I know some people are going to call in and say, wait, how do I sign up? No. We don't even know that it's going to happen. But perhaps if peace does break out, as many people think that it might, this might be an opportunity. And I know a number of people that have really wanted to make a trip like that, which would be something that would be very helpful. And the people that we've had who've been with us before have certainly benefited. And you were the one that first talked us into it because you going to Bible school and getting seminary degrees and all that, when people said, oh, don't worry about that. I think I've read my Bible. I don't need to go. And somebody convinced you to go. And then I ran into you just after you'd come back. And all of a sudden you said, it's like reading the Bible in black and white. And then when you go to Israel, it's like reading it in color or 4D or whatever you want to call 4K. These are kind of changes. And so in some respects, that's a great opportunity.
That is.
Well, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, if you'd like to join us, feel free to do so. We've been talking about a number of different aspects of this religious idea of what is happening in the Middle East. Again, I think if nothing else, it illustrates that some of these prophecies that people have been talking about for hundreds of years now make a lot more sense. We're going to talk about that right after these important messages.
listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let's talk about the religious component. First of all, talk about what is going on in Islam, and especially in Iran. Now, in Islam, you have both Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims. Most of the Shiite Muslims are in the southern part of Iraq, or mostly they're in Iran. But one of the things I quoted just a few minutes ago from Pete Hegseth is that there is a particular branch of Shia Islam that are called the Twelvers. And the reason they're called that is because they believe there were 12 divinely ordained leaders, imams. Of course, we now call them their ayatollahs. And the 12th imam, known as Mahdi, is in hiding and waiting for a global confrontation. And so, Paul, I'm going to have you give us the Christian eschatology, but I'll talk about the fact that the Muslim eschatology, I've said, is like a photographic negative of what we read in the book of Revelation, because they believe that there will be a great conflict at the end. We do. But the difference is Shia Muslims believe that he will come and create a global conflict, a final battle. And some have even thought that if indeed Iran had nuclear weapons, they would use it against the little Satan, Israel, and the great Satan, the United States. Well, the Christian eschatology is just the opposite, in which there will be a battle, but ultimately Christ will return to end that battle, known as the Battle of Armageddon. So there are, in the two major religions of the world, eschatologies, and one is almost a polar opposite of the other. Is that fair?
That's right, an imitation of what God has done. And that Satan has done that from the very beginning, from the Garden of Eden, taking what God has said, twisting it, creating a false narrative. And to dig a little deeper into prophecy, not only do we have that picture, but we even have, even in the biblical frame of reference, you have the Antichrist. Well, that is the opposite of Christ. There's a beast and there's a false prophet. There's an unholy trinity imitating, perverting what God has created. And that's what Satan does. He perverts, he changes, he corrupts. It has nothing original. He only has corruptions or things. Even, you think about idolatry. The prophets talk about, you take a piece of wood and you carve part of it, you carve an idol, and part of it you cook your food. So Satan is just an imitator, and we can look forward to what God has in store for us, because he has a beautiful picture, beautiful future for us. In fact, in the words of 1 Thessalonians 4,
there you go,
which are very important, talk about the return of Christ coming for those who have died in Christ, the dead Christians, and then those who are alive will be caught up together. That's where we get the word rapture. The word rapture is a Latin word, but it's really originally a Greek word. It means caught up. The Greek is harpazo, and that comes from here, from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And I would believe, of course, not all Christians follow the same eschatology, but I would believe that that's the next event that's going to happen, is this catching up of believers. But no matter what your eschatology, the end of this passage is really important, because as Paul's reflecting on the uncertainty of the world and Christians who have died in Christ and what's going to happen, he says this: therefore, comfort one another with these words.
Yes.
And prophecy shouldn't get us riled up. It shouldn't get us worried. It shouldn't have us, storing, food in our basement or whatever it is you think, and there's nothing wrong with those things. But it shouldn't be to think, how are we going to survive? It's to encourage one another, because we know that the Lord has a plan, and that Jesus, the rightful heir to the throne of this earth, the true Son, that God created this world for his regent, his Son, to rule and reign. Jesus will take that place. Adam didn't do it. Adam failed. And so God sends the second Adam. And not only is he here, did he come to redeem us, but he also came to redeem this earth. And so as we look at all the brokenness and the sin and the problems and the wars, it will not always be that way. There's coming a kingdom when Jesus will rule and reign, and peace will be established. His righteousness is justice. Isaiah chapter 9, he will rule the nations with a rod of iron. And that day is coming. And boy, with these events, and I'm so excited just to be here talking with you about the news. And we're taking the newspaper, we're taking the Facebook feed or the X feed or whatever it is you're reading, and we're looking at the Bible and say, wow, these things are lining up just exactly as God has said.
Yeah, let's talk about that. First of all, I might just mention, if people want to look at another verse, 1 Corinthians 15, verses 12 and following, about the first Adam and then Jesus, the second or the last Adam. But also, if you think about this, let's go back to, say, the 19th century when people were really excited about this idea of prophecy. If you were a Bible teacher back then and really were taking seriously whether it's the book of Revelation or the book of Daniel, or in this case, 1 Thessalonians and other passages, you might say, well, there's supposed to be Jews in the land. Well, there are no Jews in the land. There's no Israel. And then that happened. And then some people would look at this and say, yeah, but if I look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, there seems to be an alliance between the king of the north and we're talking about Gog, Magog, Meshech, and Tubal. Well, that kind of looks like Russia, but they're aligned with Persia. Well, at that time, Persia was Iran, and Iran was really, if anything, allied with the United States until 1979. I mentioned the fact that the Shah of Iran was deposed at that time. And then now, of course, there's a connection between Iran and Russia. As a matter of fact, some of those drones that are actually being used in the Russia-Ukrainian war come from Iran. And so you start seeing some of that. And then at the same time, even this idea of this alliance, many of these Muslim countries didn't work with each other. And now we're talking about an alliance. And so many of these things that even just a decade or so didn't make sense now are coming to fruition right before our very eyes.
That's right. And it doesn't tell us the day. The Bible says no one knows the day or the hour when Jesus is going to come. But it certainly shows us that God is lining things up, that his prophetic plan is going to take place. Jesus is coming. And here's a little bit that relates to missions, which is where my heart is. This is why we have missions. We don't have an infinite amount of time here on earth. We have a limited amount of time to reach our friends, but also to reach the world with the gospel.
And by the way, if you have never placed your trust in Jesus Christ for your salvation, let me encourage you to do so. But more importantly, I want to, just since we only have a few minutes left, to point out that if somebody would like to follow up on this, perhaps they would like to see the, and it's rather cursory outline. I don't think you and I have been able to pull together something so quickly, but it's gone, I think, pretty well. But if they'd like to contact you, especially to speak about missions or about Fellowship International Mission, we do have a link to FIM.org. And so there is information there. Also, there is a very good piece that we have on the 75th anniversary. So since we talked about that earlier, you could actually click on that button and find out a little bit more. And of course, I just held up, for those of you that didn't have a chance to see it, my magazine just came in the mail the other day. And the fact that you got this magazine put together and lived to tell about it, I think is something, because this took some work, didn't it?
Yeah, for an organization that doesn't do magazines and doesn't do banquets, we managed to pull both of those off. So.
Yes. So again, we have all those links there. And again, I would encourage you, if you would want to have somebody come and teach on some of these issues, really challenge people on missions or on all the prophetic ideas, that is certainly the case. And when it looks like it really is a possibility that we might make our way to Israel, well, we'll give you some of that information in the future. But since you were here today at Dallas Theological Seminary, I was able to pull you away for an hour. And so thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. God bless you.
Next time, bring Kim. We want to see her as well. That's his wife. And again, we've had a great opportunity to look at what is going on in Iran. Let me just mention, many of these articles I've mentioned are available. If you aren't already a donor to Point of View, let me just mention that one of our next Outlook magazines deals with Iran, the threat from Iran, the prophetic significance, even the whole question of why should I pay attention to a country that's 6,000 miles away. We have that coming out, and it's one of those things we send to our donors. So check opportunity to click that box that says donate, and we'll be back right after this.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
As they're going to be talking about the fact that God is on your side. Now, oftentimes we tend to think that is the case when things are going well, but you all recognize that many times things don't go so well, and then you begin to wonder, where is God? We've done programs, as you know, on loneliness, on abusive churches, on depression, on all sorts of questions about doubt that people have, dark night of the soul, and much more. And I thought this would be a book that would be very helpful to you, and it is something that we were originally going to schedule for August of last year when it came out, and somehow it got postponed. But in some respects, I'm glad it's coming now because of all sorts of uncertainty. Some of it is economic uncertainty. Some of it is in terms of foreign policy uncertainty. We're dealing with all sorts of issues, which I think might even more significant. And of course, at any point in time, your life may be going just very well, and then something happens, and so we'll be talking about that. We are privileged to have the teaching pastor with the Willamette Family of Churches in Portland, Oregon. He is Joshua Ryan Butler. He's the author of a number of books. I think we've seen in the past The Skeletons in God's Closet, a beautiful union about how God's vision for sex points us to good, and some things of that nature. Party Crasher, which gets into some of the political issues that we sometimes talk about here on Point of View. But the book we're focusing on, which came out, as you gather, last year, God is on Your Side, How Jesus is for You When Everything Seems Against You. And it is a privilege to welcome to the microphone Joshua Butler. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, Kerby. It's great to be with you, man. Thank you so much. Loved our conversation last time in the past, and so grateful to get the chance to talk again.
Well, again, I wanted to welcome you back and thank you for the work that you've done. And, of course, you might remember, I know a lot about Oregon because, first of all, I went to school there. My wife is from there. I go there every year to teach at Cannon Beach, and so I'm kind of well aware of some of the stories and even some of the people you thank for some of the work that you're doing. But let's introduce you for a few minutes, because in some respects, you just grab everybody by the throat at the beginning of the book by telling them about it was harder to believe when my 5-year-old daughter had a psychotic break and spent 10 days in the hospital, harder to believe when my wife and I had a big fight. I want to get into that one. Harder to believe as a newer Christian when a girl I was hung up on left you, and I won't get into that. One that we will focus on, it is harder to believe when I went blind blind in my right eye and wondered if you would eventually be completely blind. Hard to believe when a trusted friend stabbed you in the back, figuratively, not really, but again, dragged you through that. And harder to believe during this dark night of the soul. You give us this long list, and I think most individuals, if they've lived for any length of time, have had some of those situations, but yours just sort of mounted up in a way that caused you to say, I need to get back into the Gospels, especially the Gospel of John, to begin to just see my way through this. And that's, in some respects, the genesis of the book, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Like you said, I think it's easy to believe that God is on our side, that he's for us, that he's with us when life's going well. But when things take a turn for the worse, I found myself in seasons, going, God, are you with me? Are you for me? What's going on right now? As you mentioned, the season when our daughter was in the hospital and 6 months with specialists and we thought we'd lost the girl that we loved to the moon and back, or the season when I went blind in my right eye and the doctor said, you need to brace yourself because this year we think you're going blind in your left eye as well. Or just, as you mentioned, a variety of seasons where I found myself going, man, I really want to get back to the Gospel of John. It's my favorite book in the Bible. For many people, because I feel like we just get such a clear picture of Jesus and these one-on-one encounters that people are having with Jesus. And I believe John writes it in a way where we're meant to see ourselves in their story, like almost like we could enter the story and see Jesus seeing us in our predicament, in our condition, in these areas where our life can be really hard. And so for the title, kind of the idea of God is on your side, that comes from John chapter 1 with the way that John introduces Jesus. He introduces him as the Word made flesh, meaning that Jesus is the creator who has stepped onto our side of creation to be in it with us. That for those listening, and when you're in a tough spot, Jesus is God who has stepped onto your side of creation in Christ to be with you in it. He introduces Jesus, John does, as the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world, meaning that Jesus is the innocent one who steps onto our side on the cross as the guilty to fight for us. And he's not letting us go without a fight, and he also describes him as the ladder connecting heaven and earth, echoing Jacob's ladder in the Old Testament, meaning Jesus is the ascended, victorious Savior who brings his side of heaven to our side of earth in us and through us through his Spirit. And so throughout the Gospel of John, he launches with this intro, but I believe the invitation of John's Gospel, the invitation of the book, and the invitation that I've now experienced in my life in just a powerful way has been the God who encounters us in Christ, who enters on to our side to be in it with us, to fight for us, to bring his presence in us and through us into the world.
So good. Let me just mention that there's 13 chapters. Probably won't get to all of them, but each one of them focuses on something, then has a cut line when you don't know where you're going, when you don't feel wanted, when Jesus answers only half your prayer, whatever it is, and just so well set. But let's, if we can, start with one, and that is set the GPS when you don't know where you're going, and that has to do with the wedding at Cana. And if nothing else, here Jesus is certainly encouraged by his mother to provide a miracle, but very early on you remind us of something else, and this is something that I only noticed later on when I was teaching through that. If you talk about filling up these stone water jars, these are huge, and if you've ever been to Israel or seen pictures, you realize that each one of them probably held about 150 gallons. So you add all this up, and I like you did the math. I wasn't very good at this. That's 750 bottles of wine at a party, and you call it the rivers of wine. So I'd love to address that for a second, but then you talk about the seventh vessel, because the number 7 shows up a lot in your book, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So this is his first sign, his first miracle in the Gospel of John. And he turns water into wine. And as you mentioned, he makes a ton of it, like 750 bottles. So what's going on, Jesus? Why this first thing? Well, I think that we miss it if we think this was only good news for them back then. It was just kind of a party trick, like a magic trick, like look what I can do. That I believe what Jesus is doing, he is actually giving us a picture of his resurrection kingdom, like the kingdom that he has come to bring in its fullness, the wedding feast of the Lamb. And John gives us a number of clues to this. He tells us this sign happens on the third day. But he doesn't say the third day of what. The story doesn't follow behind. So you're kind of going, is it the third day of the week, like on a Tuesday? Is it the third day of the month, the third, or is it third day of the year? He doesn't say, because he actually uses this phrase on the third day throughout his gospel to foreshadow, hey, what you're about to see is a picture of resurrection. And that's what we find here. One of the things that's interesting in this sign is that there's an Old Testament backdrop. Throughout my book, every chapter, I love trying to highlight a backdrop in the Old Testament that helps us understand this miracle even more.
We'll come back and get into that because, again, Jesus' miracle at Cana is a sign, not a destination. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Affordability may be a key issue in the midterm elections. President Trump's State of the Union address and the Democratic rebuttal from Governor Abigail Spanberg illustrates the possible campaign themes. The president reminded Americans that core inflation has been at its lowest level in more than 5 years. While it is true, the metric excludes food and energy because the prices of those goods tend to be volatile. The governor proclaimed small business have suffered, everyday Americans are paying the price. Many prices are down, others are up. Gasoline prices have come down significantly. The average price of a new car hit a record high just a few months ago. The president stated that the cost of chicken, butter, and fruit is lower today than when I took office. On the other hand, the governor argued that the cost of groceries has risen. Two actions by the president will affect affordability: gas production and tax breaks. American oil production is up substantially. Lowering the cost of oil and natural gas will lower the overall cost of many items. Trump's big, beautiful bill kept taxes lower for Americans and included no taxes on tips, overtime, and Social Security. Many Americans should be pleasantly surprised by the size of their income tax refunds. There should also be a long-term benefit from the estimated $18 billion in new investments the president has secured. Affordability may not turn out to be much of a blessing for Democratic candidates or much of a liability for Republican candidates. Some economists are predicting deflation later this year because of the AI boom. In that case, job loss may be a bigger issue for voters than affordability. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Joshua Ryan Butler. God is on your side, how Jesus is for you when everything seems against you. And you're giving us some of the background, and I think that is very helpful because many of us read the book of John or any of the Gospels maybe without necessarily thinking back to what you might have seen in the Old Testament, in the book of Amos or in the book of Joel. But in some respects, there's a context there to what Jesus is doing in the wedding in Cana.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. In Amos chapter 9, for example, one of the Old Testament prophets, he foresaw that when the Messiah comes, it says this, he says that the mountains shall drip sweet wine and all the hills shall flow with it. I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel, and they shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall make gardens and eat their fruit. And so Amos, Joel, Isaiah, there are these prophecies that when the Messiah comes and he brings in the kingdom, it's going to be like, there's going to be this rivers of wine essentially like flowing. The mountains are going to drip with sweet wine, he says. And it's this picture of abundance. And it paints this picture not just of like, a party trick at someone's wedding, that's going to help them out in that situation, but of God restoring the kingdom to his people, God rebuilding his kingdom and restoring his people. And so I believe Jesus' first sign, he's going, hey, guys, that day is here. That's what I've come to do, is to reset the GPS, so to speak, to set the destination that my ministry is going for, that human history is heading towards, and that you as my people are heading towards, which is a wedding where the rivers run like wine. And it's a picture of this abundance. And as you mentioned, it's powerful that Jesus uses these 6 stone vessels that John tells us were for the Jewish rites of purification. And what's the picture here? Well, there's significance, I would argue, in every detail of John's gospel. And here, these 6 stone vessels, these are part of the Old Testament covenant where they would use these vessels for washing away from ritual impurity, basically to be cleansed. And the reality is that now Jesus, this foreshadows Jesus, I believe, is the 7th vessel. And part of what we see later in John's gospel is that you used to get washed with water, but now you get washed with wine, the wine of Jesus' blood shed. Because when Jesus is crucified later in John's gospel and the spear pierces his side, we read in John 19 that water and blood poured out from his side. Meaning, I think here, that Jesus is the 7th vessel through whom we are washed and purified of our sin, no longer with the water of the covenant of the Old Testament, but now with the blood of the new covenant, which Jesus poured out for the forgiveness of sins for our death, for our sins in his death. And so I believe the picture here that we're getting is just a massive picture of Jesus going, here's how committed I am to bring this wedding feast of the kingdom, to bring you into my kingdom, to unite my life with you forever. I'm so willing, I so want this to happen, I'm going to give my life for it. I'm going to pour out the water and blood of my life poured out and shed for you to bring about this wedding feast.
And again, if you were reading through the book of John, or maybe you are a pastor preaching through the Gospel of John, this would be a great book to actually have access to. Of course, if you've been watching, I'd say The Chosen, many of these scenes are there, and this gives a new meaning to them. And with that in regard, let's, if we can, go to the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, because in some respects here, become the beloved when you don't feel wanted. And I think many that have either read that or have seen The Chosen, I think it's an accurate presentation and recreation of this conversation that starts out talking about something as simple as water and ultimately leads to salvation. Can you speak to that?
Definitely. I love this passage so much. And one of the things that we can pass by pretty quick is this detail that it happens at a well. But I believe it's actually really significant. This is another Old Testament backdrop, that the well is actually the place in the Old Testament where the groom first meets his bride. And so Isaac meets his bride, Rebecca. She's discovered at a well in Genesis 24. Jacob, he first locks eyes with Rachel, the love of his life, at a well in Genesis 29. Moses rescues Zipporah at a well, leading to their betrothal in Exodus 2. And so there's a famous Jewish scholar who says, when you look throughout the Old Testament, the well is like a type scene, a motif that points to where the groom meets his bride. Now, what's that mean for John chapter 4, where Jesus meets this Samaritan woman at a well? It doesn't mean that there's something literally romantic going on between Jesus and this woman, but I do believe that John paints this scene in a way that that we see this as like a picture of Christ encountering the church. Like, yes, this event literally happened, but Jesus orchestrates this miracle or this scene, this encounter, to give us a picture of us encountering Christ as the bride at the well. And so if you go to that Old Testament backdrop, 5 characteristics that are interesting about that scene is in the Old Testament, the future groom journeys to a foreign land, and there he encounters a girl at a well. Both of those things happen here in John, the way John describes the scene here. One of them draws water from the well, and then the girl rushes home with news of the stranger's arrival, as happens here as well. And then the guest is invited to stay and feast with the family, as happens here at the end of John 4. Meaning that there's this powerful picture of the Samaritan woman being like a representative for us as the church.
Yes.
Like the church, the Samaritan woman is part Jew and part Gentile. That's who the Samaritans were. They were kind of a mixture of Jew and Gentile. And the church being both Jew and Gentile is a major theme in the New Testament. Like the church, the Samaritan woman's kind of from the wrong side of town, and we encounter Jesus as one who similarly has journeyed from a distant land, from heaven to earth, to meet us and encounter us and find us. And so once more here, we find this powerful picture of the God who is on our side, who crosses from heaven to earth and goes to the wrong side of town into Samaria, who is bringing together Jew and Gentile. He's doing he's doing it all to bring us back together and unite us in life.
Great image. Wrong side of town, wrong side of the country, and Jews would never go to Samaria. But nevertheless, well, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the fact that you were going blind in March of 2020, which is certainly something you talk about in chapter 4. Endure the hardest miles when Jesus answers only half your prayer, because what it sometimes means is instead of what if, to even if. And I'd love to have you share part of your story, because it also fits very well with one of those great miracles in the Gospel of John.
Definitely. Yeah. So with my eyesight, I had a gray patch of blur, some blurriness in my vision. I went to the doctor, and he's like, I think it's just cataract. We'll remove your lens on your eye. And so I had surgery, got out, and I'm like, the gray patch is still there. And long story short, they discovered there was a problem on my retina, the back of my eye, and basically I went blind in my right eye. And they said, hey, you need to brace yourself. Depending on causation, what's causing the problem, this is most likely coming for your left eye as well. And so you need to prepare yourself that you're likely going blind this year. And that, man, I suddenly had all of these fears begin to surface, like, what if I can't see my kids' faces growing up as they get older? What if I can't read and write, which are two of my favorite activities? What if I can't preach and teach, do my job kind of at least the way I currently know how? It was really unsettling.
Yes.
And there was this fear of, oh my gosh, God, what is happening? Where are you? What's going on, God? And it didn't escape me either, the irony that I lost my vision in 2020. But I found myself going, okay, how, God, how do I navigate this? And I found so much comfort in this story where in John chapter 4, at the end of the chapter, this royal official, he comes to Jesus and he begs him, hey, will you come back home with me and heal my son?
Yes.
And Jesus only answers half his prayer. He says, your son will be healed, but I'm not going with you, And I found myself wondering, oh my gosh, what was it like for that royal official to take Jesus at his word, to trust him, and to go back home, not knowing, whether or not, if you're on that road, I just imagine him walking on the journey home and going, man, what if I get home and
Nothing's
my son
happened.
died and I wasn't there?
Yeah.
Hold his hand. My wife is like, you were supposed to bring Jesus back. That's the whole point. Why did and all of the fears and the different fears of coming in, and yet so he took Jesus at his word and stepped out in faith. And I found myself in a season where, similarly, it felt like Jesus only answered half my prayer, though it was the opposite half. I sensed Jesus going, hey, Josh, I'm going to go with you, but I'm not going to let you know yet whether your eyesight will be healed or not.
Very good.
And what I believe Jesus was cultivating in me was the same thing he was trying to cultivate in that man, was trust, And so, God, I'm going to trust you. I don't know the outcome, but I'm going to trust you. And it moved me from what I would call a what-if faith to an even-if faith. From what if I lose my eyesight to even if I lose my eyesight. God, even if I can't see my kids' faces growing up, even if I can't read and write the way I know how, even if I can't do my job the way I currently know how, I'm going to trust you. God, I trust you. I know that you're good. I know that you're for me. I know that you're with me. And God began cultivating the deepest intimacy of my life with him. My theme verse became from Job, though he slay me, yet will I trust him.
We'll take a break and continue our conversation on the book, God is on Your Side, and we have information about it on our website, and we'll be right back.
You know as well as I do that elections matter, but political change can also be fleeting. After all, no politician is America's savior. To truly make a difference, the kind that lasts, we need to repair the soul of our nation. We need to reclaim America's godly heritage. We need to restore a biblical worldview to the culture. And here's the question that I want you to ask yourself. What can I do to help restore a biblical worldview to American culture? At Point of View, that is our mission, restoring a biblical worldview and reclaiming America's godly heritage. And we invite you to partake in that mission by joining the Truth Team. Learn more about the impact you can have as a Truth Team member by visiting pointofview.net or by calling 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today on God is on your side, how Jesus is for you when everything seems against you. We have a couple of links. First of all, to this book, if you can't find it in your local bookstore, published by our friends at Multnomah, you certainly can get it there, paperback or Kindle. But we also have a link to JoshuaRyanButler.com. And Joshua, for just a minute, let's mention the fact that we have information about this book, but you also have a participant's guide as well as other information on the other books. You've had a study guide in the past on your beautiful union, but there's a way in which if people are enjoying this and maybe a small group leader, a Sunday school teacher would like to work their way through this, you have additional resources that people can find on your website.
Yes, thank you, Kerby. Yeah, the Participants Guide is a great resource if you want something to go a little deeper devotionally. It's got great questions for studying the passage devotionally yourself as you work through the book, as well as group discussion questions. So if you're part of a Bible study, small group, you want to work through the Gospel of John together, it's got questions you can reflect on before you gather and then when you gather to help guide the discussion. And it's got some creative reflection exercises throughout, helping you kind of enter into that passage of John and finding yourself in sort of the imagery of the story to have that personal encounter with Jesus through his word.
So again, if you are more interested, we have all those links on our website at pointofview.net. We can talk about Rise Up. You know, one of the things, Joshua, we've found is that people, as they've been on this program and they've talked about depression, sometimes they just couldn't get out of bed. A while back, I interviewed a very prominent pastor who said, I was busy doing so many different things that when it was time to get out of my chair Sunday night to go preach, I couldn't physically get out of my chair. Now, it wasn't that he couldn't physically because, he'd been a quarterback for the local team and he was in great shape and all the rest. He just was emotionally drained. And one of your chapters is Rise Up When You're Stuck and Can't Get Out of Bed. And you think about the classic illustration here of Jesus actually taking an individual who was completely incapacitated. And as a result, he says, get up, take up your bed and walk. And at once the man was healed. And you'd think, well, great. No, because the next part of the passage talks about the fact that because it happened on the Sabbath, there was an enormous amount of controversy because on the Sabbath you're supposed to be resting. The guy had been resting for 38 years, but nevertheless, we'll leave that beside it. But again, you've shared a little bit about some of the experiences you've had, and I'm sure people in your congregation have had with depression and with just a complete exhaustion and an inability to literally get out of a chair or get out of bed.
Yes. I went through one of the worst seasons of my life where I felt like, man, I just don't feel like I can get up out of bed, off the couch. And it was depression. We had been through just a really hard season where our church had kind of imploded and dismantled. We were part of a large church, one pastor amongst a much larger team, and there had just been some, tensions and fracturing and things that were really painful and difficult. I found myself in the season after just going, man, wow, the weight of depression and difficulty trying to process and work through all that. And I found a lot of comfort in this man's situation in John chapter 5, where Jesus raises a man, as you mentioned, who is actually literally physically unable to rise up. He's been paralyzed for 38 years, we're told. And that number 38, that should perk our ears up. This is another Old Testament echo, where if you ask yourself, man, is there anywhere else in the Bible where we see that number 38 years? And there's one other place. It's in Deuteronomy 2, verse 14, where it tells us that the Israelites, they wandered in the wilderness for 38 years after Mount Sinai. So, 40 years total, but 2 years after after the first 2 years, they received the law. And because of their rebellion, at Mount Sinai, they then wander in the wilderness for 38 years where they are stuck in the wilderness, unable to rise up and go through the waters and enter into the promised land. And like we start seeing in all of these scenes in John, I believe this is a powerful Old Testament backdrop to what Jesus is doing in this miracle. That Jesus, in raising this paralyzed man, I would suggest this paralyzed man is a picture of Israel stuck under the weight of the law, the curse of the law, unable to rise up under their own strength and enter into the promises that God has for them. This is how the early church commentators saw this passage all over the place. And it's so interesting because it becomes a picture not only of Israel, but I think of us when we are relying on the law rather than grace. Mm-hmm. And like that when I am relying on the law, I can't do it. I can't get up like Israel could. They couldn't get up. I'm not able to rise up and enter into God's promises on my own strength, on my own ability. I need Jesus to step in and extend his hand and go, hey, will you let me heal you? I've come to raise you up into my life by my grace, not by your strength or performance. And this was one of the, this was so helpful to me because in that season of my life where I was like, I just can't get off the couch. I feel like I can't get out of bed. One of the questions that I was really grappling with was this question of, was I wrong or was I wronged? Was
yes.
I wrong? Did I do something wrong? And this is punishment or consequence or whatever? Or was I wrong? Did someone else do this to me? And because there was, and like a lot of situations, the situation was complex. There was human. I could have done some things better. A lot of other people could have done a lot of things a lot better. And so there was probably a mix, but that question just tormented me. Oh, what could I have done better? Regret. And maybe I could have gone about it this way instead. And oh my gosh, the pain from feeling stabbed in the back and some of the ways other people had treated, the situation and all. And so it was so difficult. But I found so much comfort because reading the story, I saw myself in this man and Jesus coming to me as I was stuck, couldn't get out of bed, couldn't rise up on my own strength. And Jesus going, hey, I've come to raise you not because of your performance, but by my grace. Like, Josh, are you going to live under law or under grace? Are you going to live under the weight of your performance? Because you're not going to be able to be good enough or bad enough. That's not the driving factor here. The question is, will you receive my grace that is coming to raise you up and bring you into my promises by my strength rather than yours?
Great insight there as well. One that I just certainly needed to focus on is raise the bar when you're battling guilt and regret. And again, this is one of those issues, Joshua, that we find ourselves talking about, guilt, shame, regret. And of course, you take us to the woman caught in adultery and then raise some questions. Where's Waldo? I love that. Hey, the dude seems to be missing here. And then the executioners, and he who cast the first stone. But again, if you are in any kind of ministry, you recognize that you are dealing with a lot of people that are struggling with guilt and shame and regret. And once again, we can get some great insight there from how Jesus addressed the woman who was caught in adultery.
Yes, exactly. I love the story. And one of the things I think, an approach some people take to the story that I think can be a bit of a mistake is a lot of people can kind of read this and kind of go, I think Jesus is just, he's lowering the bar. He's kind of going, you made a mistake, and so let's just kind of go easy on you, right? Mm-hmm. And what I believe Jesus is actually doing in this sort of how he addresses the situation with the woman caught in adultery, he doesn't lower the bar so that the woman can jump over it. He raises the bar high enough that everyone else finds themselves under it.
Yes.
And then he extends his grace. And so the way that happens, Jesus goes through, I argue, the three movements of Old Testament adultery law here, where the first movement is you're supposed to bring both of the accused, like it takes two to tango if you're talking about adultery, right? It's a two-way street. Mm-hmm. And we notice, though, that the guy's not here, and he's supposed to be according to Old Testament law. So I think Jesus implicitly confronts this, kind of going, where's Waldo? And the second piece as well is the first stone. When someone's throwing the first stone, that was an Old Testament phrase that had to do with the witness who saw the act. And the reality was, if you accused someone, but it turned out that you had improper motives, like you had set them up, or this was libel, you were falsely accusing them, then you could be liable for the same punishment you were threatening that they might receive. So when Jesus says the person without the first stone, I don't think he's just saying anybody here that's never done anything wrong in their life. I think he's saying let the person who witnessed this be the one to put their name on it. And there's a weight that comes with that. If you're going to be the first person to throw the stone, it's a lot easier to join the mob once everyone else is going. But it's the harder thing to get the thing started, and especially if you get caught doing something wrong in the affair, and you might get it too. And so there's that. And so in doing this, Jesus, kind of walks through the first two movements, and then when he gets to the third movement, there's an Old Testament echo. Famously, Jesus bends down and he writes in the dirt. And people are always going, I was wondering for a long time, what does he write? It doesn't say what he writes in the dirt.
No, it doesn't.
But I think there's actually there's an Old Testament backdrop here where in the book of Numbers, it was called the trial of jealousy, where if someone was suspected of adultery, they would write in the dirt the curse of the law and would sweep it. Well, we can go into that in a minute after the break.
Yeah, we'll take a break and come back and talk about what was written in the dirt. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Joshua Ryan Butler. God is on your side, and this is one of those classic cliffhangers. So again, talk about what Jesus wrote in the dirt, and we really don't know that, but we do know the context of it, don't we?
Great. Yes. So when Jesus writes in the dirt, this fascinating Old Testament background in the book of Numbers called the trial of jealousy, where the suspect, if someone's suspected of adultery, they're brought before the priest at the temple. And here, Jesus is in the temple courts with this woman, and he's been presented with priestly language in the surrounding passage. Well, the priest would then write the curses of the law for adultery, like in the dirt, and would sweep it into a cup with water. And Jesus here, he's writing these curses in the dirt, and he's just been described as the living water just before this. And then the curses were mixed with the holy water in this earthen vessel, and there was a grain offering of barley that was burnt. And Jesus has just been described as the bread of life in the miracle with barley bread shortly earlier as well. And finally, the accused would drink the bitter water, similar to how this woman is now facing the reality of what she's done before Jesus, the bread of life, the living water, and who's just written in the ground, and it would surface their guilt or innocence. And so what's so powerful here is I don't believe Jesus is lowering the bar. He's kind of raising the bar in this situation, walking through adultery law, and it surfaces her guilt. He doesn't say, all right, it's not a big deal. He says, has no one condemned you? Well, neither do I condemn you. And so it's not that she's not guilty, but it's that Jesus has come not to condemn her, but to save her. And then he says, go now and sin no more. And isn't that so beautiful? That's what Jesus does for us. He has come not to condemn us, but to save us. And he saves us not by lowering the bar and pretending like our mistakes and our sin or rebellion doesn't matter. No, he goes, it does matter, but I'm raising the bar so that everyone finds themselves in need of grace, because it's not about your performance, you being good enough, you being smart enough, you being strong enough, you being kind enough, you having it all together. In the midst of our broken condition where we feel like, God, I messed up, I failed, I broke the rules, I messed up my life, the grenade's gone off, and now I feel like I'm just in shambles. That's precisely where we encounter the beauty and power of grace, the God who is on your side, who comes to meet you in that place, and not lower the bar and pretend it wasn't a problem, but raise the bar and going, yeah, I don't condemn you, and I'm actually here to save you and to bring you into life with me forever.
Raise the bar. Well, I thought it'd be great to end by talking about the resurrection and Easter and the rest. Anticipate surprise when it hurts to hope. And of course, you talk about your darkest hour, because on the first day of the week, of course, John tells us that while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb of Jesus. And of course, there's the conversation you see in the other Gospels about who's going to roll away the tomb and if you will, the rock and the stone before the tomb. And she does not know who she's first talking to. But in some respects, that gets into this dark night of the soul, some of the struggles that people have. Where is God? We had a desire to hope that you were the Messiah, but now you're dead. And then, of course, we get the great surprise, don't we?
Yes, definitely. I love this scene. I love Mary, the way that she the way that Mary goes to the tomb in the dark, and she's the only one that we see here going here. And what I love about Mary here is that she has the courage to go to the hard place. If you think about in her spot, this is a spot where it seems like God abandoned them, where it seems like God's distant, this dark night of the soul, where it's not just I'm having a bad day, but it's this dark night of God, where are you? Yes. What in the world has gone on? And Mary has the courage to go and face those places. And I think it becomes a picture of the invitation we have to not avoid or kind of distract ourselves. I know when I've gone through my dark night of the soul, it was a temptation to kind of go, I'm just going to go try and distract myself, or maybe want to numb ourselves with entertainment or substances or whatever the thing is, versus going to the hard place, whether it might be in counseling, it might be in conversations with friends, in prayer, a variety of different means, but of facing the darkness, the hard spot. And what I've found is that Jesus loves to show up there, that God loves to show up in the places that we think are God-forsaken. And so what we see here with Jesus, Mary encounters Jesus at the tomb. And in her encounter, we see how the hard place has become a holy place. That she goes to the tomb, the hard place, she has this encounter with Jesus, and it's new creation imagery. That she mistakes Jesus for being the gardener. And I think that's an echo there. John wants us to know, hey, this is like a new they're in a garden, we're told. Jesus is like the new gardener, like the new Adam. And she's like a representation of, like us as the church, like a new Eve. And when we're told about the empty tomb, is that there was the stone slab, and there was an angel sitting on each end, two angels, one on each end. And this is echoing the Ark of the Covenant in the Old Testament, where in the temple, the holiest place, the Ark of the Covenant, this was like sacred ground. This was the holy place of God's presence between there. And I believe what we're seeing here in this echo now, that Jesus's empty tomb has become the new place where God, from this spot, he's now reconciling heaven and earth. Jesus, the living God, he is going forth from the empty tomb in power to bring God's presence on earth as in heaven. And from that very spot that was like ground zero of the crater drop, the place that Mary thought it was all over, that hard place has actually become a holy place, the beginning of new creation. And I believe similarly, that's on this macro, amazing cosmic level, but even on a much more micro in the intimate personal areas of our lives, I do believe that when we have the courage to go to those hard places where we've got tough experiences, tough questions, God, where are you, friend? I don't know, but we don't ignore or avoid or try and distract ourselves, but we can go to those places, that I believe in time we can anticipate surprise there, that God loves to, in time, show up and reveal himself in some ways, often most powerfully in those areas that are some of the most painful in our lives. Those are the places that he can bring some of the deepest transformation, the deepest experience of his presence. The joy that Mary describes when she sees Jesus in the scene, it's overwhelming, and I believe that through the gospel, we can experience that kind of joy too when we encounter Jesus in the hard places of our lives, that he, through his resurrection power, he is able to turn into holy places of encounter with him.
Well said. Let me just mention that before we run out of time, that we do have a link to JoshuaRyanButler.com. And you have, of course, your book and also a participant's guide. And how can people maybe use that? Because it seems to me that you've got a great resource here that you could certainly be teaching through, but certainly you have some other things where people can go deeper if they would like to do so.
Definitely, yeah. The participant's guide, it's a great opportunity for study groups. If you're part of a Bible study that wants to work through the Gospel of John, there are discussion questions there for when you gather to help you prepare, like for each week, and processing through some of the key themes from that passage in John and that chapter together. There's also study questions, reflective questions. So maybe just personally, you're wanting a resource to kind of go deeper in your personal Bible study. There's those kind of questions as well. And then it also has creative exercises in each chapter that are designed to help you, kind of guide you in prayer, guide you in a reflective exercise that helps you basically to find yourself in the story and to see Jesus seeing you, helping you kind of creatively, imaginatively enter into the story to see Jesus and encounter him in the midst of your own life and situation.
Let me just mention again, we have a link to JoshuaRyanButler.com. And of course, we talked with him in the past about the Party Crasher, which is how Jesus disrupts politics as usual and redeems our partisan divide. This one, of course, is God is on your side. And Joshua, appreciate the work that you've done in these various books that you've written. And I thank you for spending some time with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kerby. I really appreciate the conversation.
Well, let me again mention that this book is one that I think you could certainly use in your own personal study. But for those of you that have a small group or a Bible fellowship, I would recommend it as well. And of course, there are additional resources, study guides, and other things that you might want to check out. So all of that is available at our website at pointofview.net. As always, I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.